So welcome back, everybody. Covered a number of issues. Quite interesting to hear that you know, most of your businesses are actually, you know, you're doing well in the pandemic, whereas a lot of businesses are really suffering. So you know, it's a broad balance. So what does purpose mean to you, and how can that be measured? So I'm going to go to Tom first on that.
So I think, yeah, so I think in terms of, like, again, you've got to understand what your mission is as a business, and you've got to have core values around how you're going to go about trying to achieve that mission. And then I think with everything that I've been involved with, it's always a case of you should be able to have a means of measuring that you're on the right track to achieving that overarching goal. And I think sometimes people can be a bit fluffy on that, but actually, you know, with purpose, often it is measurable, and there is a way of basically delivering the evidence. And I think that's also really important in making sure that you are true to yourself and true to your business.
So Kate, that must be a question you get asked a lot by businesses you're working with. Perhaps, you know, it's the first time they've thought about how to bring purpose and articulate purpose in their business. Does that, what Tom says, does that resonate with you?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's purpose is a word. I feel like it's been overused quite a lot, and actually the meaning of it often gets lost, because actually every business has a purpose. It's just whether it's the purpose that we think it should be, or whether it's a certain environmental purpose. And you know, there's a challenge in that, and there's always a challenge in definitions and how people interpret them. But I think, you know, businesses more than ever are reflecting on why they exist, and the money motivator factor is really interesting that you're talking about earlier, Tom. I think for many people, realization that actually there are so many opportunities in creating and solving for environmental and social problems, that why wouldn't you try and tackle some of those as well? And there's so many different ways of trying to do that. So whether it's, you know, Pukka looking at kind of fair and wild, or looking at their supply chain and saying how can they alleviate people out of poverty, or how do they enhance biodiversity, they can do that by selling really great teas. And I think that's a really interesting thing around what the role of business is. It can't do everything, but it definitely, you can actually feed what broadly people understand as purpose into a lot of different business models.
What have you learned in your 27 years, Phil, on that, in articulating purpose and measuring it for you in the context for your business?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose my whole life has been around purpose, and that purpose is basically a passion that says I'd like the world to be a better place. It's driven by a sense of justice, that or tackling injustice, if you like, in all its forms. And so I think if we all ask ourselves, do we want to make the world a better place? The answer is pretty much a resounding yes, one would hope. It's really a question of then how do you go about that? And we're at such a critical point in humankind's history that we're running out of road, and what that does is it stimulates an enormous amount of energy towards we've got to do this and we've got to do it together. And I think what I've learned more than anything else is that actually where I used to be the angry warrior, if you like, in the cause of all of this, I now feel like one can get a lot more done with more sense of generosity and openness to everybody, you know, bringing everybody on board, if you like.
So the poll results have come in, and this is quite timely. Remember, I asked about, have companies got their balance of profit and purpose right? 70% of our audience think they're nearly there, so a bit of tweaking and nearly there.
Easy.
27% spot on, so confident bunch, and 3% completely wrong. So I think that's good in its honesty, because I think it's really important to articulate when you're wrong. But perhaps we haven't got enough of the naysayers in the audience, perhaps. Okay, so we've got a question from the audience, from Lucy. What are you doing to reduce single-use plastics in store or on products? And how are you supporting customers in doing the same? So single-use plastics, reducing and encouraging reduction. Vicky?
Sure, I can start with that one. We've actually just a big piece of work on our packaging policy. And actually all of this is linked to purpose, isn't it? It's all about the why you do things. And at Pukka, we always want to be leading by example in a lot of these areas. And packaging is one of those things where it's needed, but and for Pukka, we use the sachets there for our teas, for example. We use them for a very good reason. They keep the very important essential oils in our tea, which is what delivers the taste and the health benefits too. So we have now a policy that has been really hard to develop at this very front end of this huge focus on packaging, but we that it's on the right track now. We want to make sure that every single piece of our packaging can be recycled, and beyond that we want to make sure that it is. So that drives us choosing packaging that can be recycled or making huge innovations. So the sachet that we now use on our envelopes can be recycled, and we had to invest a lot of money to make that happen, because it does have to have a barrier to protect the product. So, but that can now go in your paper recycling, and we're really excited about that, because that was our kind of that elephant in the room, that thing you didn't really want to talk about. But we've now made huge strides on that, and we have now got a target to eliminate all single-use plastic in our packaging by 2025. So there's a few things like some of the lids, but we're very clear that that's something we want to get out of our supply chain.
But of course, the challenge is also, how do you get customers to know what they can and we can recycle, especially when different local authorities have different rules and different colour boxes and so on. So it's as much about consumer education. Has anybody else got any comments on the packaging?
Well, of course, Nick. Yeah, I mean, in food retail, packaging is a big issue, and actually one of the issues that we have had, although we've been pushing a lot to reduce our plastic, is that during COVID, where we had in the last year or so launched lots of more unpackaged and lots more free scoop away stuff, if you like. People have been much more reticent about using those products. So for instance, all our bread was loose and now it's all packed, just because you have to take these precautions. So ironically, we've been pushed back a little bit, but we're having some great conversations with our customers and the general public about how we relaunch coffees and takeaways and things, but using less and less plastic. And so people are now bringing in their own packaging effectively and putting it on top of a counter on a tray. We take their tray without touching it, fill it up, pass it back. They put the lids on, so we don't get involved in that, as well as all the hygiene arrangements around it. But it's a really interesting time for all of this at the moment.
Yeah. So how do we make sure, Tom, we were kind of cover this earlier, how do we make sure that we build on, we learn from what's happening at the moment and build on that and not lose momentum?
Yeah, I think we all know the existential crisis is the climate, but I think we've been locked down, dealing with issues right now. A lot of people have had to furlough staff, make staff redundant. I think there's a danger that it's we need to grow back and get to where we were at all costs, and that is the thing that we can't be complacent that we are going to continue with the path towards the climate change movement and net zero. I think the one good thing about this experience is I think that has been a big time for reflection, You know, a lot of the conversations I have, people have reconnected it in quite meaningful ways with their local communities, and sort of understood this difference between local and the global context and purpose. You know, people have been reflecting on what it is they're doing. Do they enjoy their job? Do they enjoy their life? You know, what is the bigger question? And I think coming out of this, we have to be sure, and we can't be complacent, that we tip the world in the right direction to build that better, rather than we've just got to, you know, accumulate and get things moving at all costs just to get people back into jobs and get the economy going again.
So obviously it's a very changing environment. We've had sustainability on the agenda for a while and purpose, but that's been accelerated in some respects. We've also got the Black Lives Matter movement, all of which are kind of reflecting a little bit, quite a lot in fact, desire to change the status quo. Do you think the global conversation about capitalism and society is changing at the moment? Kate?
Yeah, I mean, prior to COVID, prior to Black Lives Matter really coming to the forefront, especially after George Floyd, I would have said yes, regardless of what was happening. I think we had something called the Business Roundtable, which was the top CEOs in the US coming together to redefine the purpose of a corporation. You have the Financial Times putting a page, kind of putting their whole copy of their newspaper saying capitalism, it's time for a reset. The recognition, the widespread recognition that the business needs to change. And then on top of that, you've got this real desire and need to recognize, first of all, the climate emergency, which was a big thing that businesses were stepping into, making net zero commitments. And I can come back to that question that's there about climate emergency. And then you've also got COVID, where social businesses are seen to be more resilient, and BlackRock, for whatever we want to say about BlackRock, has got some interesting data to show about kind of the way that businesses are performing that are more socially minded. So from all angles, this is businesses operating in a way that respects and understands its impact, and generally tries to reduce it when it comes to environment, is really important. And you look at it from any angle, whether it's a citizen, whether it's a consumer, whether it's an investor, whether it's your employees. People want to work for companies that they know are values aligned and match their values. So, yeah, increasingly so. And I think what we're seeing in the US and rising up in the UK when it comes to Black Lives Matter is a really important, poignant moment for business to really step in and look at their role. So in addition to the climate emergency, which obviously people can find really overwhelming, talking about race is something that businesses have to do a lot more often, and have to recognize their role in being able to steward those conversations. And I think in the sustainability world, even more so, it's been missing for a really long time. So that's a major thing for us to really focus on.
Yeah. So is capitalism dead, Vicky?
Time to reinvent it. I mean, like Kate was saying, so many of the systems aren't working for the majority of people, and that can't be sustainable. And I'm very lucky to work for a business that was founded on purpose. You know, our founders, Tim and Sebastian, like Phil, and they're good friends with Phil, I think, you know, they created a business that was done in a different way, and has positive and social impacts across the piece, wherever you're looking, in direction of you know, our suppliers, or how we treat our people. I was reflecting on how businesses can lead first. Just a really tiny example, you know, we locked down at Pukka 2 weeks before the government issued lockdown, and that, you know, we're all working from home. We're being supported by Pukka with, you know, Carl maps, and you know, we have a well-being fund that we can spend now, all of it, so 300 quid on our well-being, 600 actually, because it's match funded. There are ways that you can nurture people and the planet, and do business, and retain staff, and make a profit. And I don't know why all businesses aren't doing it that way.
Tom, are you seeing big changes in conversations within business at the moment, as in day to day?
Yes, definitely. I mean, along both lines. So with reference to, you know, Black Lives Matter, and also climate, I think the difficulty is always that you've got this it's a constant battle between vested interest, right, and change. And I think the unfortunate thing is, if you go back through history, the only times where you saw massive realignment in inequality, where inequality dropped, were through times of violence of one form or another. So war or pestilence. We're going through something of a pestilent time right now, and we've also had a difficult time politically with the likes of Trump and Brexit, which have forced people to rethink their own position in society and activism and fighting for their own values and rights in a way that they had pretty much outsourced to government, I would say, in the past. Things were fine, right? So if you're middle class, you didn't really have to do anything, you didn't really have to engage, right? I think now we're going through a period where there are major existential challenges, both to us personally, to the social contract that we have in agreement with government, and as a consequence, I think we're at a time where you can see an above average change, right? So a 10% change rather than a traditional 2% change you might get from a change in government, and that has to be fought for. So I don't think it will happen by itself, and I think that's where also employees within a company are fighting harder, right, for their own rights, their own voices, and companies are realizing that they have to listen. So a lot of this, in terms of companies changing their axis or positioning themselves more towards values, is to do with the sort of renewed voice of the people, if you like.
And do you think it's easier for businesses to align the need, because there's consumer drive for wanting to see things done differently, as much as the perhaps the ethics and the moral position of the leadership team or the employees?
Yeah, I think the good companies that are connected and understand their consumers, that are connected to their own internal people and consumers, will survive. The ones who aren't will die. Right? Sure. So this is that sort of crisis that will shake out those companies.
So Sarah has asked on that, how do you bring purpose alive in your organisations, and how are people connected to it? Which we touched on a little bit. Does anybody want to add anything to that? Bringing purpose alive in the organisation.
I'm not sure. I think we talked. I think it was Kate who mentioned it. The term purpose is an interesting one, and it's certainly something that doesn't come into our language. But when I do think about it, it's very alive in our company. And the Black Lives Matter is something where we have a culture, if you like, that's allowed stuff to really rise up and be debated in the company, and all the people of the company who want to be are very connected with that, along with a whole host of other things. So I think it's about the people culture in your business will allow whatever your purpose is to thrive when you're good at connecting. And we're not, even with purpose-driven businesses, we're not always very good at making sure that all our people are very, very connected and very involved. So that's always a challenge that I think we need to, as business leaders, we need to challenge ourselves on how good we are at that.
Okay. This is a really live question at Pukka at the moment, because we've just gone through a purpose exercise led by my brilliant colleague Georgia Phillips, and we've gone through a realignment of our purpose, really looking at what is it that we're here to do, why, and it goes back to what we were talking about before about measuring. Can we measure that? And we're looking at that. How do we measure the impact that we're having, whether that be on our carbon, on supporting people with their happier, healthier lives? How do we do that? And one of the ways is through leading by example. That's actually, we're finding it easy to measure our mission, and one of that is leading by example. And we're a B Corp, and B Corp gives you that way, that map through its business impact assessment tool to look at how I can become a better business. And embedding that, being a B Corp, and embedding that in how you talk daily and the decisions that you make as a business is a way that you can bring purpose to life.
Okay, so we've got 1 minute left, and I think this is going to fit neatly together. To build on that and Matthew's question in the chat about, given all of that, given the opportunity and necessity is the mother of all invention, is now the time to make B Corp criteria requirements more stringent? Take this opportunity to make them more stringent now to push the agenda further forward. So
when it comes to the climate emergency, so yes, there is a reassessment of our standards and what our expectations of business, and that's being done in a very important, considered way, because this is a massive thing for us to kind of raise the standards massively and significantly for a lot of businesses, recognizing that every business needs to do better. So yes, we also had 700 businesses commit to going net zero by 2030 at COP25, and we continue with that encouragement. And we have a playbook to allow businesses to guide them to declare a climate emergency as well. So we take the climate emergency incredibly seriously, as well as social inequality. They're both very large elements.
So just quick responses then from Tom, Vicky, and Phil. Is now the time to make more radical change now through certification, legislation? Is now the time to do it?
Yes, absolutely. And I also think there's a lot of money. We haven't talked about technology. There's a lot of money moving towards this space, which I think is going to end up being a bit like the internet bubble of 96 to 2000. And I think very much now there's a lot of interest. There's a lot of, we have to keep the momentum up and double down on all angles.
Okay.
Yes, I would agree, and I think that if we're creative, generous in how we go about changing capitalism, we can really have an amazingly exciting journey, creating a world that is fairer for all, basically.
What a brilliant way to end that session. What a beautiful set of words there, Phil. Thank you all very much, Tom, Vicky, Kate, and Phil. And I'm now going to hand over back to Ollie.
Very good to see you, Nick. At Nick Sturge on Twitter. As Vicky from Pukka Herbs says, 2020 is going to be a weird year. I think that is a slight understatement. Thank you so much to all of the panel, and thank you so much to you as well. From me, Ollie Barrett, and from the team at Foregather, thank you, and we'll see you for the next Net Zero session.